Mark Waldman es autor de 12 libros en temas como neurociencia, comunicación compasiva, desarrollo personal y resolución de conflictos. Su último trabajo, publicado el año pasado en Estados Unidos, fue Las palabras pueden cambiar tu cerebro. Waldman es académico de la Universidad de Loyola Marymount, además de miembro asociado del Centro para la Espiritualidad y la Mente de la Universidad de Pensilvania. Publicaciones como la revista Time, Newsweek y el Washington Post lo han denominado uno de los expertos más destacados en espiritualidad y cerebro. Esto por su trabajo desarrollado junto con su colega, el neurocientífico Andrew Newberg. Sus estrategias de comunicación y trabajo están dirigidas a individuos y empresas, con profesionales como abogados, educadores, terapeutas, políticos y líderes empresariales. Su finalidad es desarrollar la confianza, cooperación y creatividad en el ambiente laboral y en el hogar. Estamos aquí con Mark Waldman. Mark, bienvenido a Uniacc. Welcome to Uniacc.
Thank you so much for bringing me to your beautiful country.
Mark, you say that words can change your brain, and that is not just a metaphor.
That is not a metaphor. Each and every word that we hear is processed in a different part of a brain. For example, a word like glass. It's a concrete noun. And this takes place in one specific part of the brain. But if you use the word like freedom or liberty, this is a very abstract concept. So the brain can't form a picture of it back here in your parietal lobes. Instead, it forms a very complicated notion in your left frontal lobe, for example, in this part of your brain. Adjectives are the same thing. Verbs, an action verb, like I am running or I am eating, is processed in a different part of the brain. And so that the way you put together a whole sentence makes your brain stimulated in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm. Mark, according to your work, what is the most dangerous word and why?
Yes, there is one word that if I was to put you in a brain scan machine and I flash this word and you see it for less than 1 second, it will create more stress neurochemicals like cortisol. And that word is no. Any negative word like I don't like this, no, that's not right, this puts the brain into a fear reaction. It's like when you're a young child, the word no is very important to learn. Because you see a child reaching for a hot stove, or they're going to run out into the street, and you want to yell, no! That triggers the fear mechanism in the brain, and you freeze. The problem is that everyday communication is filled with more negative words than positive words.
So, on the other hand, what would be the most important word?
Positive words like yes, or peace, or love, or any word that you focus on that gives you a sense of happiness or well-being. These words release dopamine, for example, in the brain. It's a pleasure chemical. However, negative words, the brain is designed to remember and to bury into memory negative words, and it barely responds to positive words because it's not a threat to our person. So what happens is that we oftentimes grow up being chronically negative in our communication style. And we have to retrain our brain in order to think positively and feel positively. But when we do that, when we begin to increase our positive language, so we have 3, 4, 5, 6 positive expressions for every negative expression, you end up building a better brain. You end up building a healthier brain. You can actually live longer with less stress and less disease.
Mm-hmm. You have written, God can change your brain.
Yes.
How did you become interested in these topics? Are you a religious man?
What? I personally am not a religious man, but we find that I work with my colleague Andrew Newberg at the University of Pennsylvania, and we do brain scan studies of nuns and Buddhists and Pentecostals speaking in tongues. We study people doing yoga. And what we find are two things. First of all, that positive spiritual practices are very healthy for the brain. It actually can thicken your neocortex, the most important part of the human brain, and it can actually shrink the fear part of your brain, the amygdala, if you practice long enough. The other thing that we find, we believe that every human being, whether they're religious or not, whether they're a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, has a spiritual circuit in their brain. And we define spiritual as those sets of values that have the deepest meaning for an individual. So if you wanted to, I could give you a simple exercise, and we use this exercise to train business students and people and professionals on how to remain more grounded, more focused, and less stressed out throughout the day. And what we do, and we oftentimes use a bell. So we'll ask a person to take a moment to take a deep breath in. We'll also ask them to yawn a little bit and move around and stretch, just to take 60 seconds to relax the body and to bring yourself into the present moment. And then when we train individuals in it, we oftentimes will take a bell and we'll ring it and we'll ask the person to listen as hard as they can to the bell. And as the sound of the bell fades away, you have to listen harder and harder and harder. And then if you take a moment, and once the bell has faded away, and you close your eyes, and you continue to listen as hard as you can, what do you hear? You start to hear the sounds in the room. You may begin to hear your own breathing. And this is a form of what's called mindfulness-based meditation. And in this state, you're no longer thinking about things from the past or worrying about activities in the future. You're here in the present moment. And in this present moment, a person begins to feel more alive. And for many people, this is a spiritual or mystical experience. And then we ask them the following question. What is your deepest, innermost value? And we ask a person to literally meditate on that word. What is your deepest, innermost value? And if you were to do that right now, what word pops into your mind?
I would say hope.
Hope. And the word that pops into my mind is peace. And if we had a room full of people here, and some were atheists, and some were fundamentalists, and some were Christians and Muslims, we'd go around the room, and each person might say, compassion, integrity, hope, peace, love, kindness. And by the time you go all the way around the room, it's very easy to say, look, we're all members of the same church. In other words, what religions have done throughout history is that they find particular values that they feel are essential for us to live our lives by. And that's the definition of religion. We find that this one exercise helps a person to get in touch with their own inner spirituality, their own religion, and we find that when people begin to meditate on their religious values and the images that are the most important to them, the same part of the brain lights up. It doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or Hindu or Christian. The same circuit in the brain lights up, and this circuit is involved with social awareness. It's involved with kindness, compassion, intuition. And so when you begin to communicate from this value place inside of you, it's indistinguishable from what different religions talk about as the right way to behave, the right way to speak, the right way to interact with other people.
So according to your view, spirituality wouldn't require a supernatural element, for instance?
No. But if a supernatural, again, this goes into a belief system. If you believe in an afterlife that's pleasant and filled with joy, that's very good for your brain. But we do find that religious individuals who are afraid of hell, for example, and they're worried that they've been a bad person, these would be religious or spiritual beliefs, and that type of language is damaging to the brain. That creates worry and it creates anxiety, and the stress chemicals that get released actually destroy the memory circuits of the brain.
You say that we can only hold information for about 30 seconds or less.
Yes.
So to you, how important is to speak briefly?
If I simply was to say one sentence, and if I was to tell you that our conscious minds can only hold 4 chunks of information in memory, I've already given you 12 chunks of information. So you couldn't say back to me that same sentence. Try it. What did I just say?
I can.
So we make it shorter. Speak briefly and slowly, and speak one sentence. If you really want to have an important conversation with somebody, speak one sentence slowly for 10 seconds, and then pause and let the other person respond. A conversation might go like this. I don't know what to say. Yes, this is very uncomfortable. I've never spoken this way before. This feels strange. But you know, it feels kind of fun. And then what happens? In about 5, 6, 7 minutes, you find yourself engaged in some of the most deepest, intimate conversations. Now, when we step into the business world, that's not really practical to do that. But what is important to do is, if I have something important to say, I should just say a little bit of this and then pause to make sure that you understand. And then you can go on. So we'll kind of continue this interview with a little bit more of this compassionate communication. What would you really like to ask me next? It could be on your sheet of paper or whatever pops into your mind. It could be spontaneous.
Okay. So, for instance, Uniacc is self-called the University of Communications.
Yes.
So, in your words, what are the key elements in order to achieve effective communication?
Okay. In our research, the words themselves are number 8 on a list of the 8 most important communication strategies. So I'll stop to see if
What is the first one?
The first one is making eye contact in a very specific way, and not just, if I'm totally relaxed, I'll look like I have a somber expression. I want to look at the other person's face, but I want to do so with a warm smile and a soft expression on my face. So I want to gaze with soft eyes. I don't want my eyebrows to be frowned. That will trigger a defensive reaction. So one is to be able to maintain very direct eye contact so that you can read the person's nonverbal facial expressions. They're far more important than the words. If I'm going like that, that could be a disgust or a cringing reaction. A fake smile would connote anxiety. So we want to have very close paying attention to the other person's facial expressions. That's absolutely essential. But we can't do so. We have to, again, kind of have a small half smile on our face soft eyes. Then we want to listen to the person's tone of voice. Much more important than the word. I could say, yes. I could say, yes. I could say, yes. And each one of those conveys an entirely different story. But we find that most people don't pay attention to anything but the words, and they chatter too fast. And so we have to slow down to see what the facial expression is, to listen more deeply to the tone of the voice. And that's where we begin to fully understand what the other person means.
So what is your impression about the social networks?
I would have at first, since I have a son who grew up on Facebook and playing games, I would have thought that this creates distance between people. But I now think that that's a cultural difference between older people and younger people. It's true that if you type a message, if you text a message or email a message, it's very difficult to convey positive emotions. A normal email message or a little Facebook blurb tends to read more negatively than the person intended. But if you study internet communication, you can begin to see that our kids are learning how to come up with unique ways to put feelings and emotions into their text, the symbols and happy faces. It doesn't create intimacy, but I have found, and the research supports it, that people can use text messaging and emails as a distant form of social connection. And then from that, you can begin to form closer and closer relationships. If you leave out the face-to-face connection, tremendous amount of the communication process is lost. Even using Skype, the electronic voice does not convey the stuff that's happening between you and I right now. And another one of those 8 essential communication elements is what I'm doing with my hand. We don't have to speak with our words. And so what we try to do with our students and with the world and through our books that we teach, we want a person to experiment with exaggerating their hand gestures. We want them to experiment with different kinds of tone of voice to become aware that communication exists on many, many levels. And if we really want to be great communicators, we want to become expert at the tone of our voice, at the way in which we have our facial expressions. And to do so, one of the most important things is that you have to keep your body relaxed and you have to keep your mind kind of free. Most of the time, we're trying to speak a bunch of words to get across some idea that words don't capture. We speak too long, too much. And then even when the other person is speaking, if we listen to our own inner speech, we'll oftentimes hear that we're preparing to say what we want to say next, and we're not listening to the other person at all. That's why human brains, we like to say, are very lousy communication devices. We have to learn every aspect of how to speak deeply and intimately and in ways that will create trust rather than suspicion.
Is it possible to achieve that in the current environment in the world?
It is possible to achieve that in a 1-hour training session. And so we take people through this exercise. We spend the first 10 minutes breathing deeply, relaxing, paying attention to the inner speech that's part of everyday consciousness. learning how to slow it down. We may use the bell. We may use stretching. We may use yawning to bring the person into the present moment. And then we'll just take a room full of people, 100 people, 200 people, even 5 people at a dinner table, pair them up with each other, and ask them to speak very, very slowly, one sentence. Let the other person speak for one sentence, back and forth, back and forth. And after 10 minutes, people will go, oh wow, I never realized what the experience was to slow down a little bit. And people from New York and New Jersey, and from what I hear here in many Latin American countries, speak so fast, it's filled with emotion, that we discover, oh, here's a brand new way of communicating. And the reason why this exercise is so important is that if we ask a person to spend a minute thinking about their deepest, innermost value, and then we ask a person to think about someone who they love or an event that meant something for them, which creates that kind of soft half smile on the person's face. When they then walk into a conversation, be it a business conversation or with a loved one, that soft facial expression, that warmer tone of voice, creates instant neurological trust in the other person. You do better business with less stress. And it only takes a few minutes to learn.
What is the main aim of education?
Of education?
Yeah.
Well, the way I was raised, education was to give you a lot of knowledge and tools to accomplish work tasks in the world. But at least in the United States, we're not taught how to talk to a loved one. Parents aren't taught how to talk to their kids. Kids don't know how to talk. And many years ago, Piaget discovered that the way in which we communicate and behave never seems to go beyond the age of 12 years old. So in the United States, we stopped teaching people the rules of language. All they want to make sure is that we can make the right words move. But they're not taking the time to teach how do you create intimacy? How do you create trust? How do you build cooperative dialogues? So we think that communication in the United States is terrible. I'm very excited to be here at your university, which is focusing primarily on communication. Just now in the United States, communication is becoming very important in the business world, not even in the psychology world, not even in the educational world. So we think that it's time to use neuroscience and what we've discovered about how the brain uses language, develops language, and processes language, and build new strategies so that we can talk better and more effectively with each other.
So in this sense, how important is to apply compassionate communication in education?
We think it's absolutely essential. We think that we look at everyday communication as a person being defensive. We walk into a new situation and we don't know any of the people in the room, so we might put on a false smile, that kind of smile. But that's an anxiety smile. We're not going to just really walk into a strange room and say, oh, this has been a tough day, and oh my God, I can't tell you how wonderful that food was. If I did that in a bar situation, people are going to move away from me. They're going to go, this guy's a little crazy. We're trained to begin to speak to another person from a defensive posture. But what neuroscience tells us is that that defensive posture, the moment I distrust you, the moment I'm uncertain, the moment I show the slightest bit of irritation or anxiety in my voice, the other person's brain puts up barriers becomes a little frightened, becomes a little angry. So we're suggesting perhaps that most of the conflicts in this world are caused by a basic mistake, and that if we trained ourselves to enter new conversations with new people and we stay relaxed inside, if we stay peaceful inside, we'll automatically talk more warmly and with more compassion. And the other person's brain will immediately trust us. And so we've eliminated a conflict before it even begins. That's the core of our teaching program.
Mm-hmm. So optimism is the best way to exercise our brain.
It is one of the best ways to exercise our brain. If we do not have hope, faith, and optimism that the next moment is going to be as wonderful and as good as could be, we've undermined our whole life. People who are optimistic live 2 years longer than people who are pessimistic. But again, what's important to know is that our brain is designed to remember negative thoughts and feelings and memories. And we have to work extra hard to build optimism. And that's why, for example, we ask people to make a list. Make a list of all of your negative thoughts in one day. My wife said to me that I'm a negative person. I said, no, I'm not knowing that that was a negative statement right there. And I said, I'll prove it to you. I'm going to make a list. And I took my dog and I walked down to the end of the block the next morning. In 5 minutes, I had 25 negative things. Hurry up, you're taking too long. All of this. I had to laugh. I couldn't believe that how many little tiny negative thoughts I was having. But then the next day, I only had 3. So we can consciously choose to interrupt that negativity. And we have to know also that most of the negative thoughts we have, almost every thought of anxiety and worry and fear and doubt, is a fantasy created in our frontal lobes. We take an old negative memory and we project the possibility that it may happen in the future. And it turns out that our right frontal lobe tends to constantly generate negative thoughts and feelings. And our left frontal lobe tends to generate constant positive thoughts and feelings. Both are going on at the same time. The brain is designed to pay more attention to the negative, but we have the conscious choice to just flip over and keep retraining our brains to focus. I mean, what a beautiful day, what a beautiful conversation, what a beautiful glass of water. We can take each moment in the present moment and notice that it really is wonderful. There's nothing negative about this glass of water. There's nothing negative happening right now. There's nothing negative happening in your life right now as you watch this video. What if we consciously chose to immerse every little tiny positive moment, immerse ourselves in it as if it's a beautiful meal, as if it's a great glass of wine, a wonderful piece of chocolate, so we can train ourselves to become overwhelmingly positive. And that seems to be what eliminates conflicts between people.
You wrote Born to Believe. Is it important to believe in something? It is unavoidable?
We can't help it. We are born with brains that know absolutely nothing. And so we are given a set of beliefs and values by our parents. We are taught to believe that it's dangerous to run out into the street without looking. We don't know that as children. So the brain, human brain, is kind of funny. It's never very much directly in touch with reality. We don't really see this glass of water. This is something that our visual cortex is inventing in our mind. Our entire sense of self is an arbitrary construction. We are so disconnected with the objective reality that's going on that we create belief systems about what we think is going on in our feelings, in our minds, in our relationships. And so it's very important to remember that what I believe is true about you or the world is something I imagined and created. That's why we're always taking different spiritual practices from around the world, and we remove the theology from it and simply say, if you breathe deeply and you stay relaxed in the present moment, you'll feel happier, you'll feel more alive, you'll feel more peaceful, you'll have a closer perception of what's really going on in the world, and that will change your belief systems, and that will change the way that you communicate as well.
Mark, finally, there is something you would like to add to this conversation? Some kind of message for our viewers?
Yes. Well, I would recommend, and we like to use a bell as a training mechanism. And if you have a computer, for example, you can go online and type in mindfulness bell and set it up on your computer so that it rings on an irregular basis or every 10 or 20 seconds. What we think is very important is that when you do work and when you're engaged in a conversation, that you consciously choose to put yourself fully into that moment. But at some point, whether you're writing a book or working on homework or a job proposal or a particular task, at some point you'll begin to feel yourself getting very tired. Usually in 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. The moment you begin to feel that sense of stress and tired, stop what you are doing. If you're writing a book, right in the middle of a sentence, just stop, kick back. We find that yawning and stretching is the fastest way to relax. It may be kind of silly and odd to some, but people really love that. Take a deep breath. Feel your body sitting in the chair. Maybe run up and down the block. Maybe do something that feels very pleasurable. It could be as simple as simply stroking your hands. Do something that brings you great pleasure. Immerse yourself in that activity. Use the bell as a reminder to stop in mid-sentence. If you're walking, for example, and somebody's cell phone rings, we ask that you just stop for a moment, take a deep breath, relax, come into the present moment, and then continue the activity that you're doing. This is what we teach to doctors in the hospital, surgeons before they go into the surgery room. Stop before they go into that room to talk to a client or a patient. Take a deep breath, relax. Ask yourself, what's your deepest, innermost value for this moment? Think about somebody that you love. And then walk into that room and speak slowly as I'm speaking now with that soft half smile on your face. And we think that that little action of compassion and peacefulness will help to bring a lot of peace into the world. That's our message.
Mark, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and views with us.
Thank you so much for having me come down here and be with you. It's my pleasure.
De esta manera estamos terminando esta interesantísima conversación que se podría haber extendido por mucho más. Así es que los esperamos para una próxima ocasión en Uniacc con invitados como Mark Waldman. Muchas gracias.